First step is find out exactly what happened, and we're trying to get our arms around that, getting all the relevant information from the various agencies, and starting to talk to some of the people that have information. You know, the thing that's interesting about this is that this was handled at a very senior level of these departments. It wasn't handled in the ordinary way that investigations or counterintelligence activities are conducted.
That's the Attorney General talking about how the Trump Justice Department is ramping up its investigation of the investigators. The president going a step further, saying treason was committed because he was spied on and people should go to prison. He wants to imprison the people who investigated him. Plus, Michael Flynn is back in the news. The former national security advisor pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, then agreed to cooperate with Mueller. Newly released court documents show that Flynn assisted Mueller's probe into obstruction of justice. They say people connected to the Trump administration or to Congress contacted Flynn to possibly impact his willingness to cooperate. There are even voicemails that could be made public. For insight, we turn to former federal prosecutor and good friend of the program, Roland Riopel. Hi, Roland.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
So let's start with Michael Flynn and the bits of information we got from him. He's saying either someone from the administration or Congress reached out to him to try to interfere in the Russia probe. That sounds like another attempt, at least, at obstruction of justice. What's your reaction?
Yes, it could be, Andrew. It will really come down to exactly what the contact amounted to and what was said, and whether there was any kind of threat or pressure put on Mr. Flynn. The exact words spoken will be very important to ascertain. And these may be some of the investigations that were redacted in the Mueller report that was turned over by Mr. Barr that we simply don't know about. So it certainly could be obstruction of justice depending on what was said.
I'm curious about that because it sounds like you're saying there's a way to obstruct justice or come darn close to it just if you use the right words or don't use particular other words. That seems like a pretty thin margin to have to try to figure out what side you're on.
Well, yes, Andrew, it really does come down to the words, though. I mean, if whoever it was from the Trump campaign or Congress called up Mr. Flynn and said, you know, led in with a preamble of, look, I'm not here to influence your testimony. I want you to testify truthfully, but I want you to know that, you know, Mr. Trump wishes you well. It's hard to see that as obstructing justice. You know, on the other hand, if the person, whoever it was, said something like, Mr. Trump wishes you well, and as you know, he's constantly thinking of you and thinking of pardons, that would be an entirely different thing. So it really does come down to the conversation. We don't know the details. It's hard to say for certain whether justice was obstructed or not, but it sure sounds suspicious.
The other bit of business from Michael Flynn has to deal with after the WikiLeaks began to dump the Podesta emails, he overheard campaign officials discuss the possibility of reaching out to WikiLeaks directly, which feels like at least another willingness to collude, although with WikiLeaks, not with Russia. Am I reading too much into that? Is there value in that information?
I think there is value in that information, Andrew. I think that it sounds to me like a case of conspiracy to violate the campaign finance laws if the people inside the Trump campaign who were talking to each other in this way knew that WikiLeaks was getting its information from hacked emails from Russia. If they knew the information was coming from Russia and they were talking about getting information coming from Russia, knowing that WikiLeaks was just the messenger, so to speak, then that could be a conspiracy to violate the campaign finance laws, which prohibit campaigns from accepting any help from a foreign country. Now, I will say that this seems to be something that's right down the middle of what Mr. Mueller was looking at, and it's hard for me to believe that he didn't look at this issue pretty hard and do all the investigation he could think of to do of it. And if he didn't come up with charges based on this conduct, it may be a stretch to charge somebody, but we'll have to wait and see. Again, we just don't know what the underlying facts are.
You know, Roland, you've read the Mueller report. I've read the Mueller report, but most people haven't. And I think there's a real value in hearing from some of these key figures directly, seeing them testify. I wonder if you agree. And then, if so, is it possible to get Michael Flynn or Paul Manafort to testify? And why hasn't Congress done that yet?
You know, Andrew, I think I agree with you 100% that there is no substitute for hearing from the witnesses who are cited in the Mueller report, hearing from Mr. Mueller himself, and hearing from Mr. Flynn and Mr. Manafort. This is the way the public can be educated, and that is exactly why the Trump campaign has, or the Trump White House has drug its feet so much and has asserted, you know, these bogus claims of executive privilege and all the rest of it to delay this process. They know from the Watergate hearings that the way the public finally became educated there was through the hearing process. It's the right way to educate the public. Let them see the witnesses and judge for themselves. Manafort and Flynn, absolutely, they can be called as witnesses. They can be subpoenaed by Congress. They can now be immunized by Congress because their criminal prosecutions are complete, including a sentence, and immunizing them will not endanger those criminal prosecutions in any way. So yes, they can be called and they can be forced to testify, and they should be.
Meanwhile, former White House counsel Don McGahn is at least scheduled to testify Tuesday before the House Judiciary Committee, but we still don't know whether he's going to appear then plead the Fifth, and he'd face contempt charges if he doesn't show up. But, you know, the Trump administration is going to do whatever they can to try to keep him out of there. Will they succeed in the end? What else can Congress do to get him to talk?
I think they can subpoena him. I doubt very much that they could in fact immunize him, depending on what the facts are and whether they think they would be in some way getting in the way of a criminal prosecution of Mr. McGahn, which I very much doubt. So he might well be someone that Congress could grant immunity to. I doubt very much he's going to take the Fifth Amendment, Andrew, because that would be so damaging to his reputation and his career. I don't think he'll do that. I think what he'll do is assert bogus and very marginal claims of executive privilege and the like, and just try to slow the process down as much as possible, litigate the issue of whether he has to testify up through all the courts and that kind of thing. The Trump game at this point is to delay as much as possible and play the victim in every scene. So that's what's going on here.
And as we've discussed before, very difficult to claim the privilege now when you waived the privilege when you were dealing with Robert Mueller. But while we're talking about the possibility of people testifying, anybody else you'd like to hear from? I mean, I don't know why the Democrats haven't called Hope Hicks or Donnie Jr. or even Kellyanne Conway, who everybody forgets took over for Paul Manafort when Paul Manafort left the campaign.
Well, I think they will call all these witnesses. I'm sure they are figuring out what order the witnesses should be called in to tell the story in the most coherent way. The idea here is to essentially tell it like a movie for the public. So you want to be careful about the order you call your witnesses in so that it is as coherent a story as possible. And I agree, all the people you've named will probably have evidence well worth Congress considering. Some of them may decide to assert a Fifth Amendment privilege. I don't know whether Congress will immunize them because we don't know, of course, what the other investigations are that are out there and are proceeding. But Congress should be subpoenaing all these people and doing its best to get as many facts before the American public as it can.
And we're running out of time, but if we can, what do you make of Barr's justification for his investigation into the investigators, the genesis of the Mueller probe? Do you think there's enough probable cause or information to justify launching that investigation?
No. Well, and I would point out to the viewers, Andrew, that there is an investigation already being conducted by the Department of Investigation and the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, who's a very able person. I think Mr. Barr's opening of another investigation of the investigators and these statements are nothing but propaganda for Mr. Trump to try to energize his base and cloud the issue. Remember, with respect to the FISA warrant, we had 3 or 4 federal judges read that warrant and sign off on it. I just don't think there was any impropriety here, and this is all just smoke and mirrors.
Oh, great. You always seem to send me into the weekend shaking my head, Roland. Roland Riopel, former federal prosecutor, and as always, thank you, Roland. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Andrew.
All right, enjoy your weekend. And up next, 2020 vision. That vision may be blurry with so many Democrats now running, including the mayor of New York City. More on him and some late polling for the field of nearly 24 next.